I'm Ruth Ladenstein. I'm working in Vienna, Austria. I'm a pediatric oncologist. I have, with the years in my professional life, gained roles really in the level to manage trials, and I'm very happy that I had the opportunity to be president of SIOPE Europe and taking on the role as a coordinator of the European Network for Cancer Research in Childhood and Adolescence, which is called ENCA.
My name's Kearns. I'm also a paediatric oncologist. I work at the Birmingham Children's Hospital, and I also work at the University of Birmingham, where I'm the director of the Cancer Research UK Clinical Trials Unit. And that's the unit which is a designated clinical trials unit for paediatric cancer in the UK. And I've been involved in ENCA, principally on the role of trying to harmonise the paediatric oncology perspectives in clinical trials. And I'm on the executive committee of the ITCC, Innovative Therapies for Children with Cancer, which is an early phase network looking at new drug development for children with cancer.
There are many aspects within the project that we have foreseen to contribute, but I really would like to focus today on our very strong initiative for clinical trials, because we truly believe that clinical trials are the ideal setup for young people with cancer to be treated in a very coordinated, quality-assured fashion, and it's the way to improve cure for the future. So it's for us extremely important to keep these clinical trial structures alive, and there have been a lot of problems in the past years on maintaining these clinical trial structures.
I think the EU Clinical Trial Directive was very well intentioned. It was going to harmonise how clinical trials were run throughout Europe and intended to protect the safety of patients and the integrity of data. There was no doubt about that. What went wrong was how it was implemented. It was implemented differently in each of the member states. Now, when you work in a community where you have to run clinical trials with national collaboration, having a legislation which is interpreted differently in different countries makes it nigh on impossible to run a clinical trial, and it basically paralysed international collaboration. But I think one of the pivotal reasons that it caused a problem in paediatric oncology and in all academic clinical trials was it was disproportionate in its level of legislation. It didn't recognise the difference between doing a first-in-man study for a new drug in a new indication and the need for the type of control for that type of trial, and running an academic study where you're evaluating well-established chemotherapy drugs, where you already know the safety profile and have got a lot of experience in that area. And what happened was applying legislative requirements to the second type of trial, a comparative treatment improvement trial, if you like, that was the same as whether you were doing an experimental drug. And that tied up bureaucracy and finance in running a trial rather than pure science. And that was the fundamental challenge of it.
I think, first of all, we really need to state that actually for the efforts undertaken, the Commission has to be applauded, because it's a huge effort really taking into consideration the many comments made by stakeholders over the last years. And I think it shows a huge effort of shortening the whole process of getting a clinical trial approved. But for us, the main focus is really in pediatric oncology that to bring through the possibility that we may enter with trials that correspond to a standard treatment and standard of care approach to be in a low-risk category. And this is highly important for us, as previously outlined by my colleague, that these trials are not like first-in-man studies in early drug development, where there is a much higher level of risk, but this is really standard of care treatment. And that is why we don't need like this, a lot of add-on insurances and the high level of reporting that is required for the very early trial, and what we obviously support. But we need to have clinical trials up and running and not endanger them, because that simply happened in the past. We had 25% less trials in the community. We have had an increase in costs for personnel and additional costs, like 3 times the resources that were needed prior that the directive was implemented. And this is in these years of where economic resources are very tight, particularly in the academic setting, a real threat to the trials. And so we are very keen really to have a straight way forward, even though we have to carry the burden that many of the drugs that we need to use, although they are licensed drugs and they are tested, they are not necessarily licensed in for the specific age group and the specific indication. And this is the history of pediatric oncology. In spite of that, we are up at 80% survival after almost half a decade of intensive work in clinical trials. And so this knowledge has to be acknowledged, that this is really a standard that we have established here. And I think it's really of very high importance also in terms of insurance, that we make sure that particular patient groups that are less privileged, like children with cancer, are in terms of drugs as they are licensed, that they are really taken on a state insurance model as it's proposed by the regulation. We are concerned by the discussion within the member states that are upcoming. And I think those are probably the critical points. There are definitions about what is a so-called investigational medical product, and I think we have to fine-tune this in the discussions that are upcoming, don't we?
Absolutely. Yeah. I completely agree with Ruth. I mean, we do have to applaud the European Commission for what they've done. And I think the 3 things that they've done in this new legislation that will help us, it will be equally applied across the member states. They've introduced the concept of co-sponsorship so that we can actually share responsibility. When we run an academic institution runs a clinical trial, we can share responsibility between countries, which will be helpful. And they are going to mandate a national indemnity scheme. The detail of that needs clarification, but it will help in terms of ensuring clinical trials. But even though it recognises a 2-tier risk level of trials and have introduced the concept of low risk, what they've identified as low risk won't apply to the paediatric oncology community, because what they've identified is trials that use an investigational product in its licensed indication. And the fundamental problem in paediatric oncology is the drugs that we use as standard are not being used in their licensed indication. They're licensed in another indication, usually an adult oncology, an adult disease. So almost from day one, we will not get the benefit of a low-risk trial. And this is absolutely crucial, because labelling a trial as low risk is recognising it's proportionately can be regulated in terms of reporting. And this is where our problem is. If you're going to do a trial that's going to answer a question to improve the outcome for children with cancer, that's the only data you need to collect. What's the difference in outcome? What we end up having to spend a lot of money and resource on is collecting safety data, which is not required. We already know the safety profiles of these drugs. We know how to use them together. We know what will happen. But we end up, because we don't want to be in breach of the legislation, spending all our time sorting out the safety reporting and not focusing on what's actually needed is what will improve the outcome for children.
I think the major steps forward that we really have to undertake, and this is our principal goal that we currently have, is really pushing on a very high political level the regulation towards the needs in pediatric oncology. And I think we have made this point today. And I think to focus really on this and bring it through the process that will now follow for the next 2 years at least on a high governmental level in Europe, discussing really with the members of the parliament and on a high political level, helping to understand the particular needs and partnering actually with other patient groups in rare diseases where the needs are exactly the same, although not in the segment of cancer, is really one of the big focuses that we will concentrate on.
And that's the key point, that we're not alone in our challenges. Paediatric oncology is obviously close to our hearts, but the impact of the regulations has been high for all disease groups that have small patient populations that face exactly the same challenges. So working with them, we can raise the profile of rare diseases and obviously paediatric oncology. I think that will be the ultimate goal.
I think one of the very important things and achievements is also that we are working very closely with the parents and patient groups, the survivors in particular. So we have engaged with IGUPU, and ENCA has established an advisory board of parents and patients. And the good thing is that they are ready to go with us, because they are really the voice to phrase sometimes in a much better way than we as professionals where the real needs are. And we really do hope that their voice will be heard.